Natasha grew up in Inglewood and Morgan Park. She enlisted in the Air Force her senior year of high school and has seen 11 assignments and combat deployments. While she was stationed in Florida, the murder of Trayvon Martin and the racist ideologies found in the military inspired her work as a community organizer and has dedicated a lot of her life to organizing and sharing knowledge. And now on the panel we have Kathy Kelly, who you just heard from. She's iconic. She is known for traveling the world to work for peace and end U.S. militarism. She's also known for making me cry 10 minutes ago. And she's with Voices for Creative Nonviolence. And then, okay, so let's start with Natasha. What drove you to join the military? Can you tell us about your work to stop recruitment in communities of color, and why do you think this is important?
Yeah, so good afternoon. How's everybody doing? That's good, that's good, that's good. I'll speak up. I see you back there. And so what inspired me to join the Air Force? I will just say JROTC is a recruitment tool. So just to start up top, in high school, it was popular to join JROTC over taking PE, right? And so being in JROTC gave a young student more access to programs, right? Because coming from under-resourced schools, you want to see things that are more, I don't know, to give you more of the bells and whistles experience outside the classroom was to be a part of JROTC. And I thought that's what the military was going to be like, and it wasn't. So my original promise to myself was 4 years on active duty for the GI Bill, and then I would be home. Somehow, 4 years turned into 20, and then I'm still unpacking that experience. You mentioned the assignment in Florida. It was at the Air Force Special Operations Headquarters that I spent my last 5 years, and it was there that I saw, I'd always seen the impacts of racism and sexism and just the violence of those two things. But being in Florida, which was dubbed Lower Alabama, there was a way of life, and it crossed over onto base, right? Like the Special Operations Command is a predominantly white male field, right? Because of the water qualifications and because of the rigors of, it's no different than Navy SEALing and some of the other service training. So it was a predominantly white male environment. And then here I was, and I'm an authentic Southsider. And so those two worlds collided, and the racial tensions from South Florida, from Sanford, Florida, when Trayvon was murdered, you know, those discussions happened in my office. So here I am, the black woman, in a room of 13 white men who have their interpretations of Trayvon Martin, their interpretations of a hoodie. In fact, I had one coworker that said, well, if you were to wear a hoodie, Master Sergeant Erskine, and I didn't know who you were, I'd probably shoot you too. And that was real. So for 5 years, I have become used to micro insults, microaggressions, but never the violence of like things like that. So it was really that just started pissing me off, and I started taking leave, right, which meant that I could do what I wanted to when I was on leave, and pack my kid up, and we would go down south, and we would become a part of the movement on the weekends. So it was actually fun to do the Monday through Friday, you know, and then to really go into a reality where I was starting to see the intersections of militarism and the, I would say, really the militarism of policing. And then it started there, but it was really when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, and I saw those vehicles that we had purchased for Iraq and Afghanistan roll down the streets of Florissant Avenue, right? And so to know that you've been a part of, what do you call that? That piece that was once purchased for war, and then to see it dominate and devastate the neighborhoods, right? And so when I see them here in Chicago, you know, it's what those units, those vehicles that are called mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicles are now used to serve warrants on the south side of Chicago. So that's about 18 years into my 20-year career where the moral injury, I would say, just started like messing with me a bit, right? Like just really trying to understand how what the country normally believes as keeping our country safe now means something very different to me. And the more I got promoted, I feel like the closer I got to the truth, and I'll just be quite honest, it chipped me off a little bit, right? And so, I'll kind of fast forward. So then when I retired, and that 18th year, the last 2 years was like very, very, very hard to like deal with. And so that's kind of around the same time that I started thinking like, well, who else is feeling like this? Because in the military, patriotism is the thing that keeps us focused on the mission, right? So if we keep you focused on the rah-rah of kind of like, being a part of the team, you start realizing that, but who does this hurt? And it was my family, and I see that now in Chicago. So I'll just kind of say that that's what led me to being very intentional about doing work with Chicago Public Schools and making sure that students know that, hey, it's about the bells and whistles. Like, I had a good time across those 20 years, but it also comes at a cost. And if I was to be very clear, I do not think that it's worth the sacrifice for a GR bill. Thank you.
So, kind of going off your work to stop recruitment in communities of color, why is the military, do you think, going after these communities, and what is missing in those conversations with vulnerable students?
Yeah, I serve on the local school council. I'm not sure if you all know that, but in Chicago, that means that parents and community run for local elections to be on the governing body of schools. So my daughter's a sophomore at a Southside selective enrollment school, and I can tell you just across the city, excuse me, there are selective enrollment schools, but my daughter's school is the most under-resourced and underfunded of them all. So at a school in the Loop on the north side, where they're taking multiple trips overseas, for an under-resourced school, it's easy to put JROTC in that school and kind of slap the Band-Aid on it and say that that's where your opportunities will come from. And so JROTC in that military model it's like I said, I just want to be clear that it's a recruitment tool, and so when you have an economic, I would say the deepest poverty that we've ever seen, that's automatically being put in these schools to fill the void. So there are schools where they don't have an art teacher, they're taking art online. There are schools where they don't have PE, they're taking PE somehow online. How does that work? I'm a marathoner, right? But it's like, so you don't have those programs. These are schools that used to actually have, cosmetology. They used to have home ed. They used to have mechanics. When my friends graduated back in the 90s, they, were able to go into a garage and make $18, $19 back in the 90s. That was big money. So you have those programs being stripped out of these schools and you replace it with that. It's pretty easy for the community to buy into it. It's your only option. And so with Veterans for Peace, what we're realizing is that while CPS has a policy that says that there's equal access to students, whether you're a military recruiter or someone that wants to tell them the alternative, we find that there are very few administrators and educators that would allow us to come into their school. But we do have some teachers for social justice across the district that allow us to come in and talk to their young folks in a real way. We're not trying to change minds, we're actually just trying to let folks know that there's a little bit more to the story than the recruiters will tell you. And so we want to be mentors to those that want to go in, right? That we can help them. You don't have to take a battlefield, type of job if you should do that. Again, if you should do that. So we want to have like constructive conversations with young folks to help prepare them, particularly when Chicago Public Schools is about to require, I want to say it's the class of 2020 and forward, they will have to have a graduation plan, which includes college with a gap year, you guessed it, military enlistment, or a job. So for a lot of people in these schools, it's already the only opportunity you can already see that that's a pipeline to the military. So today's current junior class will have to grapple with, if you're not going to college or have a job, you'll be going into the military. So we feel important to kind of intensify our work, to kind of push against this new model where we're telling CPS if military enlistment is going to be a part of your graduation strategy, then we need to make sure that we get folks with an alternative view than a recruiter. And I won't say alternative, it's just an expanded discussion on what a recruiter would tell a young person about what they can expect. So let's just be clear.
Thank you. You kind of touched on this already when you mentioned Ferguson on how the police and the military are connected. So I'm going to kind of combine the two questions a little bit, just to leave room for an expansion there. Seems like this is all a part of a larger and troubling trend of unauthorized wars and aggressive recruitment programs. Can you speak to the patterns we see with the police force and your thoughts there? And what is your strategy to stop this, and what can we do to help?
I'll just say it's with the equipment. I see Chicago Police Department positioned in my daughter's school where there should actually be a counselor. We see the police department having a broad presence in a lot of the South and West Side schools. Again, the militarism or militarization of schools is having a police officer in your school versus someone that can help you unpack whatever your trauma is, right? We're seeing students that are homeless in our school. We're seeing students that may have a home, but there are no parents there. We see young people who don't have Wi-Fi to do their homework. So we see all of these things kind of showing itself up, and I just kind of go from schools to, as soon as they leave the schools, you see this militarized presence in your community. Right? Just 2 days ago, we were told that one of the former schools that Rahm Emanuel closed is going to become a CPD training academy. Right? So that's in the South Shore community, and when you think about just the harm of what closed schools mean, right? And then we know that the community was supposed to have input into what those would look like. And to know that the department that has brought a lot of trauma to certain parts of the city is now going to be holed up in a closed school that should be a community center. And so across the city, just seeing, when you come outside of the school and across the street from our daughter's school, it's a gentrifying neighborhood where they're seeing a lot of I would say, property crime. And you see these two MRAPs. Again, these are vehicles that I sat in a battle update room talking about how we save people's lives on Red Road, and then to see it pulling up across the street to serve a warrant. And these are the same people, dressed out in the same, military garb that we had when we were deploying, right? So they, Chicago police having battle rattle, you just don't really understand why there's a need for that. So what can we do? I don't know, because it's so far out of control, but I think having a conversation to at least start to unpack that would be one way to start moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Next, I have questions for Robert Naiman, who is the policy director for Just Foreign Policy. Hello. So, since World War II, the U.S. has seen a lot of unauthorized wars. Why do you think it's important for Congress to vote on war?
Well, I think she just answered that question. In my mind, that's what I heard. Maybe I heard it with different ears. But we've been on this quest for 3 years now to try and force votes in Congress to try and get Congress to pass a Yemen War Powers resolution to prohibit unconstitutional U.S. participation in the Saudi war in Yemen. And as I assume everyone here knows, just this last week, that finally happened. So the quest, so in one sense, the quest ended, that, or at least that was the first book of the trilogy. The goal is drop the ring in, the volcano or whatever it is, and Saran will be destroyed. Or we hope Saran will be destroyed. Anyway, it will be powerful. So So we finally achieved that last week. It took 3 years. I never imagined it would take this long. I believed 3 years ago that, and it was true, that of all the wars the United States has engaged in, this was a special case. You know, like the Sesame Street song, one of these wars isn't like the others. Why? Why? So, first of all, because it was producing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, with the Saudi regime deliberately, openly pushing Yemen into famine, deliberately bombing civilian infrastructure like sewage treatment plants. That's how you produce cholera. So that's number one, worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Number two, most extreme case that Congress never authorized U.S. participation in the war. Nothing to do with Al-Qaeda, nothing to do with protecting Americans, nothing to do with fighting terrorism. Number three, if you look back to the beginning of the war, and this happened under President Obama in March 2015, what was the logic? What was the story? The story was, the Saudis are our friends, and we have to do this for our friends. You know, the Saudis are mad because we're having nuclear diplomacy with Iran. We have to appease our friends, and so we have to support them in this war. That was the whole story. It sounds really cynical, right? Like a conspiracy theory. But I swear to God, that is exactly the entire justification for U.S. participation in this unauthorized war that created the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. So if we can't end this war, if we can't end U.S. participation in this war, when it has nothing to do with protecting Americans, when Congress never authorized it, it's creating the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, that's on behalf of the Saudi regime, which is not very popular in the United States. In fact, you know, a lot of Americans blame the Saudi regime for the 9/11 attack, not without some justification. So you put all those things together, and you think, we can't even stop that? We can't even get Congress to vote no on that? So why is that important? Because if we can't do this, you could just hang it up for this whole field of activism about ending wars. If we can't stop this war, if we can't even force Congress to vote on it, and then we can't force Congress to vote no, and if we can't enforce that. But, on the other hand, if we could do that, then we set a precedent, not just for ending this catastrophe in Yemen, but saying, hey, guess what? You know what? The war in Syria, Congress never authorized that either. So what are we doing in Syria? And in Afghanistan, yeah, Congress voted in 2001, after the September 11th attacks, do something. None of those people, you know, ask Durbin, he says this all the time. He's like, I had no idea we were voting for 18 years of war. So my hope 3 years ago was, first of all, we can end this catastrophe and the starvation, deliberate starvation of millions of human beings by the Saudi regime with the active, knowing participation of the United States. That would be enough reason. But if we could do that, then we could look again at all these other wars and say, okay, well, a bunch of these wars Congress never authorized, so we could call the question on those. And then some wars, like Afghanistan, Congress authorized something, but the thing that we're doing is nothing like what Congress authorized. So my hope, you know, like the next episode of the trilogy, like right now, Hassan can tell you about this if he hasn't already, we're trying to force Congress to say that Trump can't attack Venezuela without congressional authorization. It's the same principle. It's exactly the same principle. Under Article 1 of the Constitution, this decision belongs to Congress, not Trump. Trump wants to bomb Venezuela. He needs to come to Congress for authorization. And, see, that's key. You know, many people would say, well, okay, but the real story in Venezuela is the sanctions. That's what's really causing the catastrophe. That's true. But again, if we can't even say that the president can't do military force without Congress, then forget about talking about the sanctions. On the other hand, if we can force that, then we could say, Okay, well, so your plan of using military force, that's not going to work. Now let's talk about what your sanctions are doing, because they have a fantasy. I mean, look who they got. Elliot Abrams, John Bolton. You know, look at this dream team that they put together from the Reagan administration in the 1980s. So, so this is absolutely key. On a scale from 1 to 10, in terms of things that are important for ending wars in the United States, and that's where we end the war, is in the United States, not in Yemen or another. So on a scale from 1 to 10, the importance of the War Powers Resolution is 11. There is nothing more important than this. And anybody who says like this is just some procedural thing, you know, doesn't really matter. This habeas corpus procedural thing, it's like you're, you know, the police come knock on your door and you say, where's your warrant? Is that a mere procedural thing? This is, if we want to end wars, the first thing we have to do is win the principle that the president cannot use military force without congressional authorization. That's how we stop. That's how we stopped Obama from bombing Syria in August 2013, by forcing him to go to Congress and forcing and blocking the authorization. There is nothing more important.
Thank you. So you kind of touched on the second question. You talked about Syria. So I'm going to move on to the third. So we just passed SJ Res 7 in Congress, and Trump has said that he will probably veto it, and so then we would have to go back and override his veto. But we did have a handful of Republicans siding with us on this and voted for it. How do you think that happened, and how can we bridge the partisan gap to move forward with this?
So that's the $64,000 question that everybody's asking. You know, okay, we dropped the ring in the lake of fire. Sauron's still alive. What now? So first of all, Trump has threatened to veto, but he hasn't vetoed it yet. So the first thing we're trying to do is get Trump not to veto. And as you alluded by your question, there's a bipartisan group of members of Congress right now trying to get a meeting with Trump and lobby him not to veto the bill. So that's the good cop strategy. The bad cop strategy, which I'm in charge of, because you know everybody does what they're good at, or they think they're good at. So yesterday I happened to be in Detroit, and so I went to Rashida Tlaib's office. Some of you probably heard of her. She's a new member of Congress, she infamously used a colorful word in describing her intent to impeach President Trump, and there was a little bit of controversy around that, you may have heard. So anyway, what's relevant to our thing is that she's talking about impeachment. In fact, she introduced language starting investigation on impeachment. But her thing so far didn't put unconstitutional war on the table. So we want her to put unconstitutional war on the table, and in particular to threaten Trump that if he continues the Yemen war, she will introduce articles of impeachment. And that's privileged in the House, just like the War Powers Resolution. That will force another vote, and we get to debate over whether to impeach Trump on exactly this question, continuing the Yemen war. And we want her and others to make that threat now. Not necessarily introduce the articles of impeachment now, but lay the threat on the table now as a deterrent. Like, you know, we could do this the easy way, or we could do it the hard way. You could sign the bill we just gave you, and, you know, please, or, you know, down comes the hammer of impeachment. And after that, there's a lawsuit. But that's, you know, down the road.
Thank you. So now I have a couple questions for Kathy Taylor. Thank you so much for being willing to sub in for this panel. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience, and what do you think Americans are getting wrong about militarism?
Well, thank you. First, I want to say that I dearly hope at some point in the future, if you haven't already heard Vince Emanuel speak, he's one of the leaders of community formation and resistance to militarism, but also has done so much positive work in terms of building communities. I think that militarism has, okay, let me say, I used to say that the national religion in the United States is shocking. But I don't say that anymore. I now think the national religion has become militarism. Not only are we in a permanent warfare state, it's almost like, brush fires. People work hard to stamp out one war and they turn around and another one is starting up. Will it be Venezuela? Will it be Iran? And so we face the problem of it gets to be a longer string of words, not only the military-industrial complex, but now I think we can rightly say the military-industrial congressional media complex is so influenced by major lobbyists and major corporations with corporate profits and often government jobs entrenched. It's very difficult to uproot this sort of edifice that maintains militarism in our country. And as Natasha pointed out to us so poignantly, even just talking about her own daughter and her own experiences in her neighborhood, this militarism is extremely invasive. It's got a vice-like grip on our education, on so much of what's happening in the sports and entertainment world. There's a way in which people are convinced constantly that your security, your personal security is tied up in being willing to let the military go anywhere in the world in order to eliminate terrorism. Well, the greatest terrors we all face, and this was pointed out so well in the morning panel, the greatest terrors we face are the terrors of what we're doing to our own environment. One of the greatest polluters of the planet, one of the greatest causes of inability to bring countries together to grapple with and tackle the problems of climate catastrophe is the fact of the United States militarism having such a grip. So I think that militarism has become a way of life. I think for the young people in this gathering today, the United States has been at war ever since you were born. But it doesn't have to be that way. We could eliminate world hunger. We could eradicate diseases. We could extend a friendly hand, a fair hand to others and be beloved all around the world. We could be admired for having decent values, but not if we allow our exceptionalism and our overconsumption to be protected by the reckless and menacing militarism of the United States.
Okay, so thank you so much for that. That was very insightful. I think it's time to open it up for questions now for the whole panel. So we're going to do a similar thing to what we did earlier. If you have any questions, could you come up, line up in one of these rows and aisles, and I will bring you the microphone. Okay, awesome.
Natasha, how are you doing in those neighborhoods? Is it a receptive audience? Or tell us how the kids are receiving your message. That's what I would like to know.
So it's my community. I would say that how am I doing in terms of bringing this message to the community? It's difficult. I thought it was gonna, well, I'll just go back a little bit to when, this idea first came up that we're going to, demilitarize CPS. I thought it would be a well-received message because it makes sense to a lot of us that are, and I guess that do the work that we do. What I didn't realize is how systemic militarism is in Chicago public schools, right? So it's almost out of control. CPS is the largest militarized school district in the nation, where the majority, I think over 96% of those enrolled are Black and Latinx. And so having this conversation with families who have zero wealth, having this conversation with families who need resources and a place for their students to go to just live right after high school, the military and JROTC appears popular. So it's not a story that resonates well with people that look like me, because very honestly, they're my family who back in '96 thought, somewhere to go to get your college, paid for, because that's not a debt that my family was able to take on. So when I look at this from an economic standpoint, I don't blame those families. I'm now moving towards, re-stigmatizing the military. That's really where this is, right? And some of the work that we do is letting people know that it is none of what you see on television. And when the things that you thought you never participated in are now required of you, or you're being charged with UCMJ violations, and when you see that you're punished for, there's no opt-out. So re-stigmatizing the military is incredibly important, and just really letting young people know that if you are going to choose this military path, ask me the questions that you want to know, but some of the things that I tell them is about once that moral injury sets in, to whether you're outside the wire, with a gun in your hand, or you're a support field that help make that happen, there's really no escape from participating in war. So that's really where the conversations are right now, and we're just continuing to build that out and what it looks like in just different ways, whether it be breakout groups and workshops where we do public education first, and then let, kind of roll into a more organic conversation.
Thank you. We had a question over here.
Jumping a little off of what Ms. Erskine just said, maybe. I was recently listening to a podcast where they talked about how not just being anti-war, but actually being pacifist, and talking about that and the importance of pacifism, the actual non-acceptance of violence at all. Anybody on the panel, what do you think of the importance of pacifism? Is it important, or what is your take on it?
Yeah, Kathy.
Well, no, and you also, Robert, but Ammon Hennessy once said, you can't be a vegetarian between meals. And you can't be a pacifist between wars. And so I have wanted to say, I guess I want to be a biographical pacifist. I don't know what will happen in my future, but I would like to opt for pacifism. But in terms of violence, who's ever going to put a gun in my hands? It's so unlikely. So whether or not I would shoot is a really kind of irrelevant question. I don't think I'm ever going to pick up a gun. But that doesn't determine or define the kind of peacemaking that I think is so essential. I think I have to ask myself each day, am I trying to live more simply each day, recognizing the situation of so many on the planet? Am I trying to figure out how to more radically share resources, share income, share housing, share work? That's a question that pacifism should address. And then certainly, am I taking risks to try to promote justice and also preferring service to dominance? I think these are questions that we have to ask ourselves on a daily basis, and then certainly do everything we possibly can to take the resources away from the United States militarists. And those are very, very difficult tasks, and I think to find kindred spirits and work together is also very important.
So I'll answer the question this way. I think that the question, the most important questions from the point of view of activism and organizing and mobilization and education in the United States to end wars in the future that we can see of the next several years. Trying to get a whole lot more people to be pacifists will not be, my expectation will not be very relevant to that. I think the most important questions have to do with appealing to the majority of public opinion around specific, like the Yemen war, right? You don't need to be a pacifist to oppose the Yemen war. You just need to know about it. And have some vehicle for action. That's key too. I think most of the time, a lot of the time, particularly it happened over a several year period, after 2013 and ISIS, the peace movement in the United States kind of collapsed because Obama was president, and because the enemy of the day was seen to be like, this time the wolf came. Like, ISIS, these people really seem like they're Nazis, you know? In some ways they are. That caused, when Obama went into Syria in 2013, that caused a lot of people to kind of throw up their hands and say, well, what are we supposed to do now if ISIS really is Nazis? With respect to Yemen, that wasn't even on the table for discussion. It wasn't being reported in the US media. It was in the European media. I was listening to the BBC. They were reporting it all the time, but there was nothing in the US media. And so we had a vicious circle of nothing happening in Congress, nothing happening in the media, nothing happening in US public opinion, because how can you have a public opinion about something if you don't even know what's happening? And the media doesn't report if Congress doesn't complain, and Congress doesn't complain because nobody's asking them to complain, because nobody knows it's happening to ask them to complain. So that was a very frustrating world of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, trying to get something going, some kind of fight going, to get people to start paying attention, to organizing. Pacifism had almost nothing to do with that. The exception to that is the following. It's very helpful when you're organizing against wars, and particularly new wars, to have pacifists around. Why? Because, you know, you're looking around for help in an emergency. It's like when you're a kid and there's a hand in the window that says helping hand. It's like, you know, when there's a new war and they've demonized the new leader of a new country and there's a war hysteria, and you're thinking, I'm against this war. Where can I find someone else who'll be against it? Look for pacifists. You know they're already against the war, right? That person is going to help you. So, Friends Committee on National Legislation, American Friends Service Committee, no matter, I tell you, this is my life experience. Like, when, you know, they want to bomb, whatever president is wants to bomb Libya or Syria or Iran or Yemen, and I'm looking around for help, I'm like, well, let's ask FCNL. They're pacifists. They can't be supporting us. If I come up with some idea for how to oppose this, they're likely to be sympathetic because they're pragmatic pacifists. They're trying to figure out how to get on the field, you know? So if I come up with an idea for getting on the field, they're the most, you know, receptive, likely to be receptive audience.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more quick question.
Yeah, I really was just going to talk about the media and my concern, like you said, that an issue I'm talking about at the College of Complexes or wherever I can find these events is the media has been atomizing us, so it's hard to get the message, really the intelligence about Yemen and about what we're really doing in the war. So I don't want to take up too much time. Maybe another question can get into. It's more of a comment, I guess.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Here you go.
Hi, my name is Shalini Gupta. I'm with United for Peace. And one of the things that we've talked about is the power of the military, industrial, and media caucus. And, you know, that's a powerful caucus there. So for citizens to unite and to be a force to fight against it, I'm very happy that this kind of a summit has taken place. My question is, what are we doing to create a giant coalition of organizations like I've met in the room today? I think there are lots of organizations in the room, and what are we going to do coming out of this summit to pull them together into a force that can become a powerful voice?
We've already done that. I would turn that question around. See, I think it's the wrong way to think about it, to look at all these, or not as helpful, look at all these words like, oh my God, we've got, like, there's the Pentagon contractors, there's Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, so there's all that, and then you have the ideological things, and it's like the way people talk about campaign finance reform. People would get overwhelmed. You think, well, oh, if the reason the way things are is because, like, rich people have all the money and power, and that's why everything's happening, well then why should we bother? Like, if they have all the power and we can't do anything, let's go get stoned. I mean, why suffer for nothing? You see, that's futile. That's a disempowering message, is to always be, eloquent about the awesome power of the adversary. We need to be eloquent about our awesome power. We just beat all these forces last week. List them all. List them all. The Pentagon, industrial, media, AIPAC, we beat AIPAC. On the House floor, we beat AIPAC. Everyone's saying, oh, AIPAC, ooh, we better look out. Don't mess with AIPAC. They're going to stop you. We just stopped AIPAC. So this is the key, and again, this is why, to me, this is so important. We need to prove to people that this is not futile. If people think it's futile, they're going to move on to something else. Because obviously there's other things you could do, like, let's try and stop police in our community from shooting unarmed black people. If ending war is futile, let's do something else. That's perfectly reasonable. We have to show that ending war isn't futile in order to get people to spend activist time and energy on it. So I don't think it's an over there thing. Like, we need to do a new thing over there to oppose militarism. Opposing the Yemen war is opposing militarism. We have to win. We have to pick specific strategic fights. We have to win those fights to show that our adversaries aren't as powerful as they want everyone to think they are. AIPAC wants people to believe that AIPAC is more powerful than AIPAC is. And the same is true for all these other forces. They want this learned helplessness thing. We need to do the opposite. Like, we need to be like the person in the Milgram experiment who stands up and says, no, I'm not going to torture this person anymore, and gets other people to rebel. That is our role. So, look, I would say, organize more people around concrete fights, figure out how we can link concrete fights. Like, as our sister was talking about this militarism thing in the Chicago public schools, I was thinking, how could we connect that with what we're trying to do in Congress? In fact, I just, a couple of days ago, was having this conversation with the same congressional staffers that led on this Yemen fight, thinking, could we have like a truth in recruiting bill in Congress? Like, what could we require the recruiters to tell, you have to prove before you can sign up to the military, there has to be some documentation that the recruiter told you X, Y, and Z, and I know, just like, when you sign up for a mortgage or, you have to sign a bunch of papers saying, yes, they explained to me that blah, 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 blah. Let's do that for the military, and let's make the asks be strategic. Like, did you explain that under the Constitution and the War Powers Resolution, only Congress can authorize the use of military force, so if that didn't happen, then the war is unconstitutional? Did you explain that? Did the person agree? Yes.
Thank you. All right, we have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for being on the panel with us today. Thank you again. Let's give them one more round.